So 9th edition has acquired an entirely new phase of the game, a command phase, and we'll also talk about a few new nice pictures of those Skorpekh Destroyers and the new rules for their blades. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering the news from 9th edition as it comes out, to talk about where our armies are going to be in a couple of months' time. Warhammer community is keeping up a steady influx of news on the edition, so first up we'll take a second look at those Skorpekh Destroyers, and then talk about a few new previewed rules for the game, including what that command phase might mean. So first up, we've already seen these models in their 3-up design prototype models, but now we've got some actual pictures of them painted up close and personal in all of their glory. These guys are the Skorpekh Destroyers, and some of the main antagonists that we saw in that fancy new preview trailer for Warhammer 40k 9th edition. If that leaked picture is to be believed, then it looks like these guys are going to be present in the coming 9th edition starter set, marching to battle alongside that new Skorpekh Lord. Games Workshop have confirmed that these are a variant of Destroyers. They have remodelled the standard Destroyers with their flying platforms, who like to obliterate their foes at range. We saw one of those in that large Necron army shot, and he looks like he's been significantly upscaled compared with the previous models. These Skorpekh Destroyers, however, apparently seem to be preferring to cut their foes apart at close range, with these frankly enormous looking blades. They've shown off the rules for the one in the centre, but according to the article, the other two have various different profiles as well, and in the community article it said some different weapons. I really do wonder whether or not the guy on the left is going to be the same as the guy on the right. To me they do look like very similar weapons, except that the guy on the right has got far longer extensions to those blades that go out back behind his elbows, and the guy on the left has only a shortened version of them. Makes me wonder whether we're seeing two guys with the same weapons that are just a bit of fancy detailing different, or whether or not they're going to have even more different profiles. I guess we're going to have to wait and see. In any case, this guy in the centre is going to be armed with what's called a Hyperphase ReapBlade, which to me sounds like one of their more awkward names for a big fancy glowing sword, and certainly one that you want to be a bit careful around the pronunciation of. I can only imagine that Games Workshop is in some way scraping the barrel in terms of names for a big fancy glowing sword in Warhammer 40k, and are trying to come up with new and different ideas. In any case, this guy's got a strength of +2, AP -4 and damage 3. I guess we're not certain of the amount of attacks he's going to be getting, but even if it was just 1 or 2, it's pretty much an ideal weapon for chewing through Primaris Marines, whether it's more lowly intercessors or otherwise pretty tough aggressors or inceptors. As the rules stand at present, standard destroyers are strength 4. I wouldn't be amazingly surprised if they upgraded them to strength 5 for this particular unit, so I suspect that we'll be seeing these guys hitting at either strength 6 or strength 7 with those blades. Obviously we don't know points costs, any other special rules or any other abilities, so absolutely no comment on how good they're going to be, but it looks like they're very much anti-elite or anti-vehicle killers. One thing that slightly concerned me about later contraptions walking towards the enemy with fancy close combat gear was that they might be a little bit slow, but the article did mention that they'll still be wickedly fast as they skitter forwards. That certainly implies faster than 6-inch movement. I'd guess something like 8 inches or 10 inches if I was going to make an educated guess. I really hope that's the case, as they're really quite awesome new models, and I'd hate to see them relegated into being a bit useless just if they were too slow to make combat with that fancy gear, because they're not going to be doing anything at range. All in all, very cool. I'm certainly looking forward to finding out more about the Necron releases coming up. Next, I thought we'd talk about some of the new rules previewed for 9th edition. In an article the same day, they basically talked about some of the new rules coming up incredibly vaguely, and they had a nice video interview with the playtesters where they said basically that the edition sounds fun, while telling us absolutely nothing about it. They did, however, post a couple of pictures up, including what looks like a couple of excerpts from the core rules of 9th edition, the first of which being this little rules key. This is just a little intro page that tells you how to use the rules and laying out the way that they've formatted and highlighted it, such as having white boxes on the sides that give slightly advanced rules that aren't present in every single game. I can see the Smite rule being a special one for the Psychic phase, as obviously it's not going to be relevant if you don't have any characters who have Smite. There's not really all that much to glean from here, but I thought it was quite interesting that they'd managed to clarify the movement phase, where basically you first move units, then bring in reinforcements, rather than just having the wording bring these guys in at the end of the movement phase. I think 8th edition has acquired quite a lot of bits and changes, where you do things at the start of the turn or the start of the shooting phase, and bringing down reinforcements greater than 9 inches away at the end of the movement phase seems to be something that's pretty much universal across the course of 8th edition. I think it's good that they're trying to fold these into the core rules just a little bit more, as it gives them a bit more clarification on the sequencing of these things, and underlines when they're happening to newer players. More interesting though, they also posted a preview of the battle round from 9th edition, outlining the phases of the game and what order things happen in, and it largely looks like the vast majority of things are going to be staying the same. We still move, psychic, shoot, charge, fight, and then suffer morale casualties. so no sweeping changes to the way that the game is played. It's still very much I go, you go. We're not jumping to alternate activations or anything. But I found the most interesting addition the addition of this new command phase, which we'll come on to in a second. Before that though, I thought it was really quite good that they managed to clarify out of phase rules, which is something that comes up quite a lot in 8th edition. Say, for example, if you use the Space Marine stratagem Auspex scan, you can get it to immediately shoot the enemy as if it were the shooting phase. Now this can sometimes create some slightly janky interactions, such as people being uncertain as to whether or not you apply the other rules in the shooting phase to that attack, and a lot of people thinking that you might be able to use stratagems that can be used in the shooting phase to buff that attack. That's something that I think has been in the remit of FAQs up to now, so it's good to have that folded into the core rules of the game. Basically, if a unit can do something where it's shooting as if it were the shooting phase, you'd typically be able to use all the buffs on the unit from the shooting phase, but you can't deploy things like stratagems, which actually say in their rules that they can only be used in the shooting phase, and they don't say anything about being able to be used in other phases, even if one of your units is happening to make a shooting attack, say in the movement phase, as with Auspex scan. So I think that's good to know, and it's definitely a good example of them consolidating FAQs into the new edition, hopefully cutting down on the amount of misconceptions when people are picking up games of 40k. So the most interesting thing though I think is this new command phase. Details on this look very sparse, but I think we can still extrapolate quite a lot. On that little chart that we just saw, apparently the command phase is where both players muster strategic resources and use tactical abilities. And in the Warhammer community article, they further expanded on this by saying that battle-forged armies will generate command points in this phase and then use them on certain stratagems. I think this is really quite an interesting shift. It sounds like at least to some extent you're going to be getting command points on a per turn basis, rather than have every single command point that you have available right from the start of the game, as is typically the situation in 8th edition. I think this is really quite an interesting idea and potentially quite a positive one for the game. I'm not 100% sure what those certain stratagems will be, but it's easy to think of some examples, things that you do at the start of the turn, and then basically have an effect all through the turn. Say for example Imperial Knights and their Machine Spirit Resurgence stratagem. That's one of the ones that you use at the start of the turn, allowing your units to function on its maximum profile for the rest of the turn. So it would seem like a perfectly logical one to include in this command phase. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of rule saying, if your stratagem says use at the start of the turn or battle round, then you use it in this phase. It's really not going to work for a lot of stratagems still though, things that you actually use when a unit shoots, or say reactive stratagems, say like Duty Eternal, which you only use when a Space Marine Dreadnought is targeted by a shooting attack. So we can pretty safely assume that not all stratagems are going to be used in this phase. I think it's going to be interesting with the amount of pre-game stratagems that armies have the options to use, compared with the ones that acquire throughout the game. I think that we know that armies are definitely going to have some sort of stratagem options that they can use pre-game, as an absolute ton of powerful options and abilities can only be used pre-game in Warhammer 40k. Common examples are things like buying in relics and warlord traits, putting things in reserve in some way, such as the Orc Teleporter stratagem, or Eldar using the Webway, or upgrading various other units to have other abilities in-game, such as maybe a Blood Angels player making their warlord have Death Visions of Sanguinius, the one that gives them the Death Company keyword and the Black Rage. All of that stuff certainly isn't going to stop existing overnight, which means that we will have to have some sort of amount of command points at the start of each game. If we really are going to be generating every single turn though, then I suspect that it's probably going to be quite a small amount of command points that we're going to start with, and that might actually limit the amount of these pre-game options that we can now use. It might become a real choice between whether we want Death Visions of Sanguinius or say an additional relic in the army, as you might not actually be able to have both if you're running low on command points due to other pre-game stratagems. It sounds like things might be even further stretched by including allies as well, who Games Workshop have confirmed that they're going to cost us CP in some way. Certainly going to be interesting adjusting to this new system. On a more positive note though, I do think that generating command points throughout the course of a game will probably make things more interesting. In general with command points and stratagems at the moment, I think there's a huge incentive to just blow all of your command points as quickly as possible in the game, to increase the amount of damage that you're dealing, to be able to remove chunks of your opponent's army as soon as possible, and get an edge early on in the game, because if you remove enemy units sooner, then they're not able to deal damage or impact the game for the rest of the game, so it's basically incentivizing you to try and alpha strike the opponent's army as hard as possible, or make your army super resilient in the first couple of turns conversely. It means that in a lot of more competitive games, in general people might well have spent all of their command points by turn 1 or turn 2, at least if we continue to generate them into the last few rounds, then we'll still have access to all of our interesting options, even when the game starts to wrap up more. I think that will lead to more interesting tactical decisions. We don't know exactly how things are going to be generated, but the text under that command phase sentence says both players master strategic resources and use tactical abilities. It's interesting that they say both players in this, as the wording for the rest of the round is saying like your units shoot the enemy units or your units declare charges. Just from that, I'm guessing it might be getting 1 command point per player turn rather than per game turn, which would mean that we'd get quite a lot of CP over the course of the game. Or I suppose it could just have that wording because if you use any of your stratagems in your opponent's turn, then that would need both players to act. Maybe we'll get some more clarification on this from Games Workshop later in the week, as they hinted in the article. Again, we don't know whether there might be other restrictions, such as having your Warlord on the table, or maybe that you can only generate them for the first 5 battle rounds or something like that. We really don't know, and we're going to have to see the full rules. We do sort of have a precedent for this though, which is the Age of Sigmar hero phase that they have at the start of each turn, where they do generate command points, but only at the start of your own turn I believe, though please correct me if I'm wrong Sigmar players. And then rather than using them on stratagems and things, they use them on certain command abilities, which various heroes can activate, either in the hero phase or sometime else in the turn. I think it's clearly this that's inspired the addition of this phase to 9th edition 40k. It'd be interesting to see these similarities and differences. Hopefully I do kind of hope that they tie in some certain abilities that some of the characters have to this phase, things like the Chaplain's Litany ability. The one where you have to roll a dice to see if they get their certain litany off, which is a buff that starts at the start of each battle round rather than each player turn. I just find it really quite an easy one to forget, as you have to remember to do it even if it's not the start of your turn, even if it's the start of the opponent's, so hopefully if they roll this into the command phase, then it might be a little bit more memorable, as both players should be active in this. So, as always, looking forward to finding out more. On the whole, I think that this sounds like a positive change to 9th. Despite my slight misgivings about not tying troops to command points, and therefore maybe making them not quite as attractive an option. Let me know what you think of the new rules down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe or check back later. I'll be trying to keep up with the 9th edition news as it comes out for us. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention my Element Games affiliate link, which is down in the description below. Basically, if you live in the UK and are looking to pick up some Warhammer models in the near future, then Element Games sells basically anything Games Workshop, but for a 10 to 20% discount. If you place an order after clicking that link in the description, then a little bit goes to help support the channel without costing you any more. So it can be a nice way to support the channel if you were thinking about ordering in a bunch of miniatures and you wanted to help out without it costing you any extra at all. I also have a similar link for Amazon for people in the USA and Canada. Basically that one works in a similar way. If you click the link before making any Amazon order at all in the next 24 hours, then a small amount of money goes to Auspex Tactics, whether you're buying in Warhammer 40k stuff or something completely different. Again, can be just a little way to help support the channel and keep the videos coming without it costing you any extra point of checkout. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.